The most sacred promise I ever made wasn't spoken at the altar or sealed with a wedding band. It was a silent vow made one quiet, unbearable Friday night, when I whispered to myself in the dark, long before I broke every rule I thought defined me. Not just as a wife, but as a mother. Before I continue, I need to say something. If you believe emotions can't always be sorted into right or wrong, if you understand that the heart often defies logic, then stay with me. This isn't a tale meant to justify, it's meant to tell the truth, even the parts that make us uncomfortable. What happened to me didn't start with betrayal. It started with absence. The house was unusually quiet, as if it had forgotten what it meant to be full. My husband, Robert, was on the final stretch of a long business trip. For nearly 2 months, I'd been living without his voice echoing through the halls or his heavy footsteps grounding the space. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was the kind that hums in your ears and tightens around your throat. That night, I lay awake, eyes following soft patches of moonlight drifting across the ceiling. The weight of the emptiness inside me was impossible to shake. I didn't just feel alone, I felt invisible, like I was fading away in my own home. And then, out of nowhere, I heard the faint sound of the bedroom door moving. It was quiet, barely audible, but unmistakable. I sat up slightly, heart pounding, and saw a shape in the doorway. Tall, hesitant, bathed in the dim yellow light from the hallway. My son, Leo, stood there. 19 years old and suddenly looking like both the boy I raised and someone I no longer completely recognized. He clutched the doorframe like it was holding him up, his voice barely more than a breath. Mom, my chest tightened. That voice, gentle, unsure, had always been a sign. Even when he was little, Leo never just said things. He lingered, hesitated, like he was afraid the words might break something. I asked him what was wrong, but he didn't respond right away. His shadow stretched long across the floor, motionless, like even stepping further would cross a line he couldn't uncross. Then he moved, slowly, almost like he didn't trust the ground under him. His steps made no sound on the carpet, but his presence was overwhelming. The energy shifted, the air felt thick, hard to breathe. He sat at the edge of my bed without asking. His voice was fragile. I couldn't sleep, he whispered. I glanced at the clock. It was just past 2 in the morning. Leo hadn't come to me like this in years, not since the days of childhood fears and bad dreams. But this was different. He wasn't scared of monsters under the bed. Whatever was keeping him awake now lived inside him, and it was something he didn't know how to name. The most sacred promise I ever made wasn't spoken at the altar or sealed with a wedding band. It was a silent vow made one quiet, unbearable Friday night, when I whispered to myself in the dark, long before I broke every rule I thought defined me. Not just as a wife, but as a mother. Before I continue, I need to say something. If you believe emotions can't always be sorted into right or wrong, if you understand that the heart often defies logic, then stay with me. This isn't a tale meant to justify, it's meant to tell the truth, even the parts that make us uncomfortable. What happened to me didn't start with betrayal. It started with absence. The house was unusually quiet, as if it had forgotten what it meant to be full. My husband, Robert, was on the final stretch of a long business trip. For nearly 2 months, I'd been living without his voice echoing through the halls or his heavy footsteps grounding the space. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was the kind that hums in your ears and tightens around your throat. That night, I lay awake, eyes following soft patches of moonlight drifting across the ceiling. The weight of the emptiness inside me was impossible to shake. I didn't just feel alone, I felt invisible, like I was fading away in my own home. And then, out of nowhere, I heard the faint sound of the bedroom door moving. It was quiet, barely audible, but unmistakable. I sat up slightly, heart pounding, and saw a shape in the doorway. Tall, hesitant, bathed in the dim yellow light from the hallway. My son, Leo, stood there. 19 years old and suddenly looking like both the boy I raised and someone I no longer completely recognized. He clutched the doorframe like it was holding him up, his voice barely more than a breath. Mom, my chest tightened. That voice, gentle, unsure, had always been a sign. Even when he was little, Leo never just said things. He lingered, hesitated, like he was afraid the words might break something. I asked him what was wrong, but he didn't respond right away. His shadow stretched long across the floor, motionless, like even stepping further would cross a line he couldn't uncross. Then he moved, slowly, almost like he didn't trust the ground under him. His steps made no sound on the carpet, but his presence was overwhelming. The energy shifted, the air felt thick, hard to breathe. He sat at the edge of my bed without asking. His voice was fragile. I couldn't sleep, he whispered. I glanced at the clock. It was just past 2 in the morning. Leo hadn't come to me like this in years, not since the days of childhood fears and bad dreams. But this was different. He wasn't scared of monsters under the bed. Whatever was keeping him awake now lived inside him, and it was something he didn't know how to name. For Leo to come into my room like that, something had to be deeply wrong. I sat up and swung my legs over the edge of the bed, the cool fabric of my nightgown brushing against my skin. I motioned for him to come closer. "Sit down," I said softly. He hesitated before finally lowering himself onto the edge of the mattress. His posture was stiff, and his hands were clenched tightly in his lap. He kept his eyes fixed on the floor, and I could feel the tension radiating from him like heat rising off pavement. My heart ached at the sight. I reached for the calmest tone I could manage. "Talk to me, Leo. Whatever it is, you know you can tell me." His fingers twisted the hem of his t-shirt. He took a breath, unsteady and unsure. "It's hard to say out loud." A chill ran down my spine, instinctual and sharp. But I held my composure, keeping the steady voice I'd used through scraped knees and broken hearts. "Then just start somewhere," I urged gently. He finally looked at me. And when our eyes met, something in his expression knocked the breath right out of my lungs. His eyes were raw, filled with something that scared me. "It's about someone," he said slowly, haltingly. "Someone I think about all the time. Someone you wouldn't expect." A strange sense of relief stirred in me, foolish and fleeting. A college girl, maybe. A crush. That would make sense. Leo had always been the kind to hold things in too long. "Okay," I said, trying to encourage him. "Who is she?" "Anyone I know." He shook his head quickly, almost violently, like the question itself hurt. "No," he muttered. "It's not a girl from school." I stared at him, the faint feeling of unease turning into something colder, heavier. I didn't know why, but I felt like I was standing on the edge of something that could never be undone. "Then who?" I asked, more gently now. "Leo, please, whatever it is, we'll deal with it. Together." He sucked in a breath so big it looked like he was trying to draw strength from the air. And then he said it. "It's you, Mom." The words didn't register at first. They just hung there, soft, impossible, awful. I blinked, unsure if I'd even heard him right. "It's always been you," he added. Everything inside me went still. The room felt like it had been emptied of air. I tried to speak, but my voice came out weak, uncertain. "Leo, what are you saying?" He jumped up, started pacing like he was burning from the inside out, dragging his hands through his hair in frustration. "I know how it sounds," he said, his voice breaking. "God, I know, you think I don't, but I've tried, so hard, to stop feeling this way. I've buried it, I've fought it, but it just keeps coming back." I sat there frozen, my heart hammering so hard I could barely hear his words anymore. My hands gripped the edge of the bed. "Please, Leo, stop, this isn't real." He stopped pacing and turned to face me. His face was pale with anguish. "It is real," he said. "It's the only thing that's ever felt real. What I feel for you, it's not like anything else. It's not just admiration. It's not a crush. It's everything." I whispered his name like a prayer, like saying it might undo whatever had been unleashed. "I'm your mother," I reminded him, my voice trembling. "What you're feeling, it's not love. It's confusion." But he didn't see it that way. Tears filled his eyes, and his voice cracked as he said, "It is love. You're everything to me. You're the only one who's ever really seen me," he said softly. "The only person who's ever made me feel like I matter. If that's not love, what is?" Tears pricked my eyes. I stared at the young man in front of me, my son. My beautiful boy, the same child I held through colic, through scraped knees, through every heartbreak of his young life. Now sitting across from me, saying things that no mother should ever hear. And yet, beneath the panic, under the natural instinct to protect and retreat, something flickered. It was brief, dangerous, and I refused to give it a name. "You're confused," I said, struggling to steady my voice. "You're going through a storm of emotions right now. That's all this is." He didn't waver. "I've never been more sure of anything." His voice had a weight to it, no longer the uncertain tremble of a boy, but the force of a man who believed what he felt. The energy between us changed, heavy and charged. I felt like I was standing in a space that was no longer mine to understand. A space that demanded I back away, but I didn't. Instead, I reached out. My hand found his arm. His skin was warm, the muscle tight with tension. He was shaking, though he tried to hide it. Leo, I whispered, these feelings, they'll pass. I promise. Time will make sense of them. What if it doesn't? He said, his voice cracked, brittle and broken. What if this is who I am? What if this is the only love I ever understand? I swallowed hard, my throat felt tight, and words failed me. I couldn't give him the answers he needed. All I had left was reassurance, something, anything to hold us both together. You're not alone, I said at last. We'll figure this out, we'll get through it, together. His eyes searched mine, glassy with emotion. There was something in them that made my chest hurt, a vulnerability so deep it felt like a wound. I can't lose you, he said in a whisper. You won't, I replied instantly, tightening my grip on his arm. Never, I promise. Without thinking too much, I pulled back the covers on the other side of the bed and gestured gently. Just stay here tonight, just sleep, maybe some quiet will help. He hesitated, then gave a small nod. A visible wave of relief crossed his face, softening his features. Slowly, he slid under the covers. I tucked the blanket around him, my hand brushing his shoulder. The space between us felt charged, too quiet, too full of things unspoken. But I said nothing more. And neither did he. There was a spark, not the kind that warms you, but the kind that startles, jolts, lingers like an aftershock. I snatched my hand back, as if I'd touched an open flame. Good night, my love, I whispered, turning away from him to face the wall. Sweet dreams, Mom, he said quietly behind me. The silence that followed was suffocating. Not empty, but too full, stuffed with everything we hadn't said, every line we'd stepped too close to, every truth we were trying to ignore. I lay there, eyes wide in the dark, listening to his breathing. A flicker of hope tried to spark in my chest. Maybe we could move through this storm. Maybe time would smooth out the chaos. But somewhere deeper, beneath the hope, beneath the need for order, I knew better. This wasn't the end, it was the beginning, and the night that would one day follow this one, it wouldn't end with us sleeping on opposite sides of the bed. Have you ever felt something you knew was wrong, but it was the only thing that made you feel completely seen? Tell me, have you ever had to choose between the person you're supposed to be, and the person you are? The days that followed became an exercise in pretending. We moved through the house like nothing had happened. Carefully, deliberately, he tried, he really did. More time with his friends, less time in the hallway where I passed. I buried myself in distractions, work, yard work, anything physical enough to wear down the nerves and keep the guilt from whispering too loudly. He slept in his bed. I slept in mine. We talked about small things, milk in the fridge, a show I thought he'd like. But beneath it all, his words from that night hovered like mist on the walls. No matter how hard I scrubbed my mind, I couldn't wipe them away. His glances held something heavier now. Not just attention, intention. Even the most innocent moments, passing him a plate, brushing his hand, sent lightning down my spine. I kept telling myself he was healing, letting go, but when the house got quiet, when no one was around and my thoughts turned louder, I had to face the truth I didn't want to say out loud. I missed it. I missed the intensity. I missed being looked at, not as a mother, not as a function, but as a woman. Seen, desired. Robert was a good man. Safe, predictable, a soft rhythm I'd come to lean on. But Leo, his confession had shattered that rhythm. It was like a stone hurled into a calm lake, and the ripples stirred things inside me I had buried long ago. Then came the storm. A week later, rain slammed against the house like it was trying to tear it down. Sheets of water blurred the windows, isolating us in a gray, humming cocoon. I thought we were fine. That we had reached some uneasy middle ground. But storms don't always stay outside. He found me in the living room, staring at the wet garden through the glass. And from the moment I saw the look on his face, I knew, for him to come to me like this, something was deeply, terribly wrong. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, the silk of my nightgown cool against my skin. Come here, sit down. He hesitated, then perched on the very edge of the mattress, back straight, hands clenched in his lap. He stared at the floor, anxiety rolling off him in waves. I could almost see it, like heat shimmering on asphalt. Leo, talk to me, I whispered, my voice gentle. Whatever it is, you can tell me. We'll figure it out. We always do. He took a shaky breath, twisting the hem of his shirt. It's hard to say out loud. A chill traced its way down my spine. Still, I kept my voice steady. Then just start somewhere. He finally lifted his head. His eyes were raw, almost feverish with emotion. It's about someone, he said slowly. Someone who's always in my head. But, it's not what you think. My heart sank. A girl, maybe, a secret too heavy for him to carry alone. Okay, I said gently. Who is she? He shook his head. It's not a girl from school. Then who? He hesitated, then exhaled, his words more fragile than I expected. I don't know who I am anymore. I feel so much, and none of it makes sense. I keep reaching for someone who makes me feel safe, and I don't even know if that's okay. My chest tightened. His words weren't romantic, they were human. Honest. The unfiltered ache of someone lost inside himself. Adam, I said softly, using his middle name like I used to when he was little and afraid. What are you saying? He stood up and began pacing. I don't know. I feel broken. I don't connect with anyone. Not my friends. Not even Dad sometimes. But with you, I feel seen. Like I matter. Like I'm not invisible. I swallowed hard. His pain wasn't about inappropriate feelings. It was about identity, disconnection, and craving comfort in the only place he felt safe. Leo, I whispered, reaching for his hand. You're not broken. You're overwhelmed. That's different. But what if this is who I am? He asked. What if I'm just too much for everyone else? You're not too much, I said. You're exactly enough. You just haven't found the right place yet where you can be fully you. But this, me, I'm your mother, and I will always be here. Always. Tears welled in his eyes. You're the only person who's ever made me feel like I'm enough. I stood and pulled him into a hug. Not one born of confusion, but of a mother's fierce, grounding love. That's because you are. He held on tightly, like he needed me to keep from floating away. And I held him like I was anchoring his heart. Stay here tonight, I said, gently. We'll rest. Tomorrow, we'll talk more. He nodded, voice cracking. I'm sorry I'm like this. Don't be sorry, I replied. You're growing. It's messy, but it's human, and you're not alone. He lay on the far side of the bed, like he did when he was young and scared of the thunder. I turned off the light. The storm outside tapped on the windows like it always had, steady and honest. As I lay there listening to his breathing, I didn't feel fear. I felt purpose, because no matter how dark the path ahead, I would walk it with him. Guiding him, loving him, mothering him. The minutes stretched like thread pulled too tight. The silence between us pulsed with 1,000 things unsaid. I shifted slightly under the blanket, and my foot accidentally brushed his leg. He stilled. The air thickened instantly, humming with something we both refused to name. I didn't pull back. Instead, I let the moment breathe, even though it felt like holding my breath underwater. Then, his hand reached over, not in desire, but for something gentler. Reassurance. Connection. I wasn't sure. His fingers brushed mine, hesitant, and I let him hold them. That touch, simple as it was, carried a storm of emotions, confusion, longing, guilt. I turned to face the ceiling, staring into the dark as if it would offer clarity. It didn't, he whispered. Is this wrong? I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mind was a whirlpool of instincts, maternal, moral, emotional. But overriding all of them was one undeniable truth. He felt something for me that scared him. And maybe, in the quiet corners of my soul, I had felt something too, something I had never let surface until now. But this wasn't the way. It couldn't be. I think, I said softly, we're both hurting. And we've confused that hurt with something else. His silence was devastating. Then a breath, shaky. So, what now? I squeezed his hand gently and released it. Now we get help. Real help. We talk to someone who can help us understand these feelings. What's real, and what's not? He didn't answer for a long time. But then I heard the subtle shift of his body turning away, and the blanket rustling as he settled in. No words. Just quiet. It was the right kind of silence this time. One that didn't hide things, but held space for healing. It wasn't about mechanics. It was about sensation. It was the feeling of being truly, incandescently alive, for the first time in years. A pulse beneath the surface of a life that had long gone quiet. The dissolution of loneliness, if only briefly. A connection that, in its intensity, felt like devotion. Born not from desire, but from familiarity. From years of care, protection, and understanding that had morphed, confused itself with something it was never meant to become. In that moment, it didn't feel wrong. But it didn't feel right either. It felt like walking through a dream, familiar and dangerous. A place you visit in sleep, but know you cannot stay in once the sun rises. When the silence settled again, we lay there, not touching. Not speaking, just breathing. The storm outside had finally passed, but another had taken its place inside us. He turned his head slightly, the faintest curve of a smile in the darkness. "It's okay, right?" he whispered. I couldn't answer. I simply rose from the bed and walked quietly to the bathroom, where the mirror met me with a version of myself I didn't recognize. The weeks that followed blurred. A fragile normalcy returned, like tissue paper over fire. Leo was lighter, quieter. A calmness had replaced the tension that once clung to him. And me, I was a shell of steadiness, performing the choreography of my life with Robert while something raw and unresolved festered underneath. Then Robert came home, and with him, reality. Every laugh I shared with him felt scripted. Every glance toward Leo made my chest tighten with guilt. He withdrew again, quietly, like the tide pulling back before a wave. Back to his friends, his routines, his version of escape, and I folded myself deeper into the role of wife, trying to silence the part of me that had dared to ask for more. But the memory lingered, not as an act, but as a moment. An invisible thread connecting us, not in sin, but in confusion, in fear, in all the questions we didn't have the courage to answer. Now, I live in the echo of that storm. A woman wearing the titles of wife and mother, but carrying a heart stitched with questions. What happened may sound unbelievable, but it's real, and I am left with the only question that truly matters now. What would you have done? If this stirred something inside you, confusion, empathy, discomfort, understanding, share your thoughts below. I read every single one. Like this if it reached you. Share it with someone who might understand. And subscribe for more stories that come from the quiet places we're often afraid to speak of. Sometimes the ones we love come to us with truths that scare them, and us. But love, at its most powerful, is patient. It's listening. It's being the anchor in someone else's storm. Thank you for reading. Stories like these remind us how important it is to create safe spaces for emotional honesty. May we always meet vulnerability with grace. Disclaimer. This story is a fictional account meant to explore emotional tension and family relationships. It is crafted with respect for healthy boundaries and mental wellness.